Nobody inside Judge Judy's courtroom expected the moment that would come next. It started like every other ordinary case, a simple dispute, a restless audience, and Judge Judy sitting on the bench with that familiar, razor-sharp composure that had carried her through decades. But today, there was something different. Not in the case. Not in the plaintiff. It was the defendant, a large, loud woman with a reputation for turning every room she entered into a battleground. People called her Karen behind her back, but not because of her size, not because of her look, because of her unstoppable entitlement, the kind that eats respect alive. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. From the second she walked in, Karen had fire in her eyes. The kind of fire that wasn't born from truth, but from strategy, as if she arrived with a plan before she ever opened her mouth. And for the first few minutes, Judy didn't fight her. She didn't interrupt. She didn't snap back. She let Karen speak. She let her spin her story. She let her feel powerful. Because for once in her own courtroom, Judy wasn't the strongest voice in the room, and the audience knew it. Karen was loud. Karen was aggressive. Karen wanted control. And Judy simply listened. Patient. Quiet. Underdog. Then Judy asked a single question. One line. Soft. Precise. Barely louder than a whisper. And that was all it took. Karen erupted so violently that the courtroom itself seemed to flinch. She slammed her hand on the podium, pointed straight at Judge Judy, the woman who'd humbled CEOs, exposed liars, crushed scam artists, and screamed at the top of her lungs. You're only attacking me because of my weight and my color. You're a racist. The entire room froze. For the first time in a long time, Judge Judy didn't look furious. She looked wounded. Not because the insult hurt her personally, but because she knew exactly what Karen had just done. She had weaponized a word that carried real pain, real history, real victims, all to escape accountability. And suddenly, the underdog wasn't Judy, it was the truth itself. But what nobody in that courtroom knew, not the audience, not the cameras, not even Judy, was that someone had already seen what happened before this blow-up. Someone who knew exactly why Karen walked in with so much confidence. Someone who held the one truth that would flip this entire courtroom upside down. The bailiff. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But the look on his face. That quiet, controlled fury. It told a story nobody was ready to hear. And when he finally revealed what Karen did before the cameras even rolled, the courtroom would explode. But that's coming. Right now, we start with the accusation that shook the entire room, and placed Judge Judy in the rarest position of all. The underdog in her own courtroom. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Karen was telling the truth, or just playing the victim card to escape judgment? Your answer helps this video reach more people who care about real justice. The air inside the courtroom didn't settle after Karen's accusation. It thickened. It tightened. It wrapped around the walls like a storm cloud waiting to burst. People weren't whispering anymore, they were staring. Some at Karen. Some at Judy. But most at that invisible space between them where the accusation still hung, heavy and poisonous. It was the kind of moment that could shatter a reputation in seconds, and everyone knew it. Karen leaned back with a look of triumph stretching across her face, almost daring anyone to challenge her. The audience shifted uneasily, some avoiding eye contact, others pulling out their phones as if capturing the moment would somehow protect them from being part of it. In their eyes, Karen wasn't just defending herself, she was attacking the one person who had never been accused of anything close to this in decades. And the worst part? Judy didn't fire back. She didn't slam her gavel. She didn't deliver one of those famous lines that could slice through steel. She just sat there. Still. Quiet. Underdog. Not weak, never weak, but wounded in a way the room didn't know how to respond to. They were used to her dominance, her certainty, her unmatched authority. But they weren't used to seeing her become the target of a weapon she never deserved. And the silence she held felt more powerful than any explosion she could have unleashed. Karen mistook that silence for fear. "You hear me?" she barked, loud enough to force a few people in the back row to tense. "I'm calling it out. This judge is biased. This judge is discriminatory. And I won't sit here and let her disrespect me." Disrespect? The word rang like an insult of its own. Judy had asked one question. One quiet question. But Karen wasn't here for questions. She was here for war. She had walked in ready for it. Her shoulders wide, her voice sharpened to cut, her pride swelling on top of a foundation built from anger and something darker, something strategic. Judge Judy took a slow breath, her eyes lowering for a moment. It wasn't surrender. It was control. The kind of control that comes from knowing that the truth doesn't need to shout. But she also knew the truth wasn't enough right now. Not when Karen had just shifted the entire room by claiming something so explosive. So dangerous. So irreversible. A false accusation hits harder than a real one because it lights a fire that burns the innocent first. And Judy? She felt the burn. But Karen wasn't done. Her voice rose again, feeding off the tension like it was fuel. "You just don't like women who look like me. You only go easy on the skinny ones. You judge me before hearing me. You're against people like me." The plaintiff dropped his head into his hands. He hadn't expected his simple case to turn into a social media battlefield. The cameras in the room weren't meant for drama, they were meant for truth. But truth had taken a back seat to spectacle, and Karen was driving. Judge Judy finally lifted her gaze. Her voice, when it came, wasn't hard. It wasn't stern. It wasn't even annoyed. It was calm. "Ms. Parker," she said, "I haven't judged you at all. I simply asked you to explain the timeline." But her words didn't matter. Not to Karen. Not to the audience. Not yet. The accusation had already poisoned the atmosphere. Every person watching felt forced to choose a side before any evidence had been presented. And that was exactly what Karen wanted. The louder she complained, the more she painted herself as a victim. The more she cried out discrimination, the less she had to defend her actions. Victimhood is the easiest mask to wear, but the hardest to remove once the truth comes out. And Judy could sense something wasn't right. Not with Karen's story. Not with the way she kept glancing at the audience, making sure her performance landed. Not with how she overplayed her emotions in the exact moments when the courtroom quieted, as if she needed silence to recognize her spotlight. But there was something else, something only one man in the entire room had noticed the moment she walked in. The bailiff. He stood near the bench, arms crossed, eyes locked on Karen like he was piecing together a puzzle he already knew the answer to. At first, he didn't say anything. He didn't move. He didn't react. But Judy saw it, the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight shift in his stance, the way his gaze hardened every time Karen lied. And everyone else missed it. Because all they could see was the show. Karen's voice rose again. "You're humiliating me because of how I look," she cried dramatically. "Because I'm not your perfect little TV-type person. Because I'm big. Because I don't fit your pretty standard." The audience gasped, not because they believed her, but because the accusation itself was enough to shake the room. It was like watching a match being held over gasoline. One wrong breath, and the entire place would explode. Judy didn't move. And that made everything worse. The audience misread it as weakness. They didn't realize it was strength. They didn't realize Judy had been trained for decades to stay steady under chaos. They didn't realize she had endured more real attacks than Karen could imagine. They didn't realize the underdog wasn't losing, it was waiting for the truth to rise. But the truth wasn't in Judy's hands. Not yet. It was standing 10 feet away, in a uniform, silent and simmering. And when he finally spoke, the entire narrative would collapse. But that moment wasn't here yet. For now, the courtroom drew deeper into tension. The plaintiff looked defeated. The audience confused. Judy outnumbered. Outshouted. Momentarily outpowered. And Karen? She smelled victory. But victory built on lies is a mountain of dust, one gust of truth, and everything falls. And the bailiff. He was the gust. The courtroom felt like it was balancing on the edge of a knife. Karen had thrown her accusation like a grenade, and instead of exploding instantly, it rolled slowly across the floor, waiting for the slightest push to detonate. She stood there with her arms crossed, chin high, breathing heavily as if she had just fought a war and believed she'd won it. But beneath her bravado was something else, something Judge Judy noticed the moment the noise died down. Fear. It was small, but it flickered across Karen's face every time Judy tried to meet her eyes. She would look away, glance at the audience, read their reactions, adjust her posture like an actress studying her crowd. Confidence didn't need validation. But manipulation did. And Karen was checking her audience like she needed them to stay on her side to survive. Judy kept quiet. Not because she was intimidated. Not because the accusation had broken her. But because she sensed something was off, not just with Karen's words, but with the timing, the intensity, the desperation behind them. Lies always smelled like panic. And Karen was sweating panic through her smile. "Ms. Parker," Judy finally said, voice soft, "you made a very serious accusation just now. Before we go any further, I need you to explain, specifically, what I said that was racist." Karen blinked, startled. She hadn't expected Judy to stay so calm. She hadn't expected her to remain composed. People like Karen thrived on reaction, they needed chaos to fuel their narrative. But Judy offered none. Her quiet was like a mirror, forcing Karen to see herself clearly. And she didn't like what she saw. You were looking at me differently." Karen stuttered. "You kept staring at me like I was disgusting." Judy didn't even blink. "I was looking at you while you spoke. That's how listening works." A few chuckles rose from the audience, but Karen's glare silenced them immediately. "You were judging me the second I entered this room." Karen snapped, her voice rising again. "You think because I'm big, because I don't look like some celebrity, that I'm lying. And are you?" Judy asked softly, almost too softly. Karen's face twisted. "I'm not lying," she barked. "You just can't handle a strong woman standing up to you." Strong woman. Judy almost smiled at the irony. Strength wasn't loud. Strength wasn't angry. Strength didn't fold when the truth touched it. And Karen was folding faster than she realized. Judge Judy leaned back, her eyes steady. "Ms. Parker, let's return to the timeline you provided earlier. You said you arrived at the store at 2:15. But the receipt the plaintiff submitted shows the transaction took place at 1:48. Karen blinked again. "Hard. Too hard." I got the times mixed up," she said quickly, waving her hand. "You're twisting everything. You're trying to make me look stupid." "I don't have to twist anything," Judy replied calmly. "I'm reading what you handed me." Karen tightened her grip on the podium, her knuckles turning white. Her breathing grew uneven. Her eyes darted around the room again, searching for support. The audience had shifted, the sympathy she thought she had earned was slipping through her fingers. They were watching her more skeptically now, their expressions uncertain, their posture cautious. Karen felt it. And she panicked. "You're doing it again," she shouted. "Trying to embarrass me because of how I look. You think you can intimidate me the way you intimidate skinny people?" Judy didn't flinch. She didn't counterattack. She didn't rise to the bait. "Ms. Parker," she said gently, "this has nothing to do with your appearance. It has everything to do with your honesty." Honesty. The word stabbed Karen like a blade. She froze. Just for a second. But long enough for Judy to see the truth behind her eyes, a truth no one else had noticed yet. Karen wasn't angry. She was hiding something. Something big. Something she didn't want brought into the light. The plaintiff shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Karen like he suddenly recognized the person he'd been dealing with all along. The audience leaned in, sensing the shift. And the bailiff, who had remained still as stone until now, tilted his head slightly, as if confirming a thought that had been forming since the beginning. He knew. But he said nothing. Not yet. Judy continued. "Let me ask you again. What part of my question was racist?" Karen swallowed. "All of it," she said, but her voice cracked on the final word. "Then tell me how." Karen opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No answer came. And in that moment, the room felt it, the first fracture in her story, the first crack in her shield, the first sign that her accusation wasn't truth. It was strategy. A weapon forged in panic, sharpened by entitlement, thrown in desperation. And the only person in the entire room who knew exactly why Karen had done it was standing 10 feet away, watching her crumble, waiting for the moment when he would finally speak and end her entire performance with one devastating truth. The bailiff wasn't just a witness. He was the key. And Karen had no idea her downfall had already begun. The silence in Judge Judy's courtroom grew so heavy it felt almost physical, like a weight resting on every pair of shoulders in the room. Karen stood stiffly at the podium, chest heaving, her earlier confidence leaking out of her like air from a punctured balloon. She had thrown the loudest accusation a person could make, but now she was choking on the responsibility of proving it. And everyone could see it. Judge Judy remained unmoving, her hands folded neatly, her face unreadable. She wasn't just calm, she was disarming. And that scared Karen more than any explosion of anger could have. Judy wasn't fighting her. Judy wasn't defending herself. Judy wasn't even giving her the satisfaction of reacting. Judy was simply waiting. Waiting for the truth to reveal itself the way it always did, with patience, not force. Karen tried to recover, to rebuild her earlier bravado. She tossed her hair back and puffed out her chest like she still owned the room. But her voice betrayed her. You always target people like me," she said, stumbling over her words. "I've seen your show. I see how you talk to women who aren't tiny like those Hollywood types." Judy tilted her head. "Is that your argument? That your size excuses lying?" Karen flinched. "I didn't lie. Stop twisting my words." "I'm quoting your words," Judy replied calmly. The audience murmured again, now openly suspicious. Karen's performance wasn't landing the way she expected. The room wasn't falling at her feet, they were pulling away. And nothing fueled her panic more than losing a crowd she thought she controlled. The bailiff watched every second of it. He stood with perfect stillness, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on Karen. But there was a tension in him that hadn't been there before. A tightening of the jaw. A shift of the shoulders. The kind of signals a man gives when he knows something vital, something that could flip the entire room upside down if he revealed it. But he hadn't spoken yet. He was waiting for the right moment. The moment when the truth would carry the most weight. Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "Ms. Parker, earlier you said I judged you before you even spoke. But I simply asked you to explain your timeline. Is there a reason that question made you feel attacked?" Karen stiffened. You're twisting this whole case around. This isn't about timelines. This is about you humiliating me in front of all these people. No, Judy said softly. It's about whether you stole from the plaintiff. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, real fear flashed across her face. Not anger. Not indignation. Fear. The plaintiff looked up suddenly, sensing the shift. The audience leaned in. Even the cameras seemed to zoom closer, catching every micro-expression, every tremble in Karen's voice. I didn't steal anything, she snapped quickly. Too quickly. You told the store clerk you didn't have money, Judy said calmly, yet the plaintiff states you walked out with the merchandise anyway. Karen swallowed. Hard. Her lips tightened into a thin line. Lies, she muttered. Everyone lies about me. They're all against me. They all want me to look bad. Judy raised an eyebrow. Everyone. Karen's voice cracked. Yes, everyone. People like them, she gestured wildly toward the plaintiff and audience. They don't like women like me. They think I'm lazy, stupid, pathetic. You all think that. A few audience members recoiled. That wasn't a defense, it was projection. She wasn't describing their feelings. She was describing her own. Judy saw it instantly. Ms. Parker, she said slowly, you have made accusations against me, the plaintiff, the clerk, and now the entire courtroom. Are you sure the problem is everyone else? Karen's breath went shallow. And that's when it happened. The bailiff stepped forward. Just one step. One soft, deliberate, heavy step. And the entire courtroom felt it. Karen's head whipped toward him instantly. What? She snapped. What are you looking at me like that for? But the bailiff didn't answer. He simply held her gaze in a way that made her chest hitch. Judy noticed the movement. She turned her attention to him, the slightest spark of understanding flickering in her eyes. Is there something you wish to add? Judy asked quietly. The audience gasped. The plaintiff froze. Karen's mouth fell open. The bailiff didn't speak. Not yet. He simply inhaled deeply, as if gathering the courage to expose something that had been burning inside him since the moment Karen walked through the door. Karen panicked. You can't say anything, she barked. You're just a bailiff. You're not allowed to testify. Stay in your place. Her voice boomed off the walls, sharp and desperate. And in that single outburst, she revealed more than she intended. She wasn't just afraid of Judy. She wasn't just afraid of losing the case. She was afraid of him. The room knew it instantly. Judy's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in recognition. Something connected. Something unlocked. The dynamic changed in one moment. The underdog, the quiet, wounded, composed Judy, was no longer alone. The bailiff had stepped forward for a reason. And Karen knew exactly why. She started shaking her head quickly. No. No. Don't you dare. Don't you dare tell them what happened outside. Don't. The audience erupted in confusion. Outside. Something happened outside. Judy's heart kicked once in her chest. The truth wasn't just close, it was pressing against the door, ready to blow the entire case open. The bailiff finally lifted his chin. Your Honor, he said quietly, I think it's time they know what she did before the cameras started rolling. The room exploded. Everything was about to change. The courtroom erupted into a wave of whispers the moment the bailiff spoke. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It wasn't even said with anger. His voice was level, steady, almost too calm for the weight it carried. But that calm was exactly what made the room snap to attention. People knew instinctively, whatever he was about to say wasn't a guess, wasn't an opinion, wasn't an exaggeration. It was real. Karen's entire posture collapsed. She wasn't yelling anymore. She wasn't performing. She wasn't grandstanding for the cameras. She shrank back from the podium, her hands trembling so obviously that even the plaintiff noticed. Her eyes darted wildly to the bailiff, as if hoping she could scare him into silence. But intimidation only works on people who fear you. And he didn't. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, allowing him the floor, not as a judge asserting power, but as a woman finally stepping out of the corner someone tried to trap her in. The underdog was rising again, but silently, letting truth, not volume, do the work. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, facing Judy but keeping his eyes locked firmly on Karen, "before we went on air today, Ms. Parker caused a disturbance outside the courtroom." Karen shook her head so fast it looked painful. "Lies. He's lying. He's trying to protect you." The bailiff continued without blinking. "She arrived 30 minutes early. She verbally attacked the clerk. Called her a skinny nobody. Told her she didn't need to wait in line like everyone else." Gasps shot across the room. Karen squeezed her eyes shut, hands gripping the podium as if it was the only thing holding her up. "That didn't happen," she screamed. He's twisting things." But the bailiff's voice only grew clearer. "She also told security that if you ruled against her today, Your Honor, she would claim you discriminated against her. She said, and I quote, 'A judge won't risk being called racist. I'll win either way.'" The audience froze. Judge Judy's breath caught in her throat, not out of shock, but out of vindication. She had felt something wrong the moment Karen walked in. Now she understood exactly what it was. Karen's accusation wasn't emotional. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't pain. It was premeditated. A strategy. A weapon. A plan to manipulate the courtroom before the gavel even struck. Karen's lips trembled, her face draining of color. That's not, he's making it up." Judge Judy finally spoke. And her voice, quiet, precise, devastating, cut through the room like a scalpel. "Ms. Parker, you didn't come here for justice. You came here for a performance. You tried to turn my courtroom into your stage. And you used one of the most painful accusations a person can make, as a shield for your own misconduct." Karen collapsed into her chair, unable to speak. "And worst of all," Judy continued, "you believed the truth could be drowned out if you shouted loudly enough." The courtroom was silent. Not a breath dared interrupt what came next. But today, the truth had a voice of its own. Karen didn't lift her head. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Because it was over. Her lie had been exposed. Her plan had collapsed. And Judge Judy, the underdog moments ago, stood taller than ever. Before we move to the final part of this story, comment justice if you believe the bailiff did the right thing by speaking up. Your comment helps this video reach more people who love real truth in the courtroom. The moment the bailiff finished speaking, the courtroom changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was something far more powerful. It was the sound of belief shifting. The same people who had hesitated minutes earlier, unsure whether Judy was guilty of the ugly accusation Karen had thrown at her, were now seeing everything through a different lens. A clearer one. A truthful one. And in that lens, Karen wasn't a victim. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't a mistreated woman calling out injustice. She was an architect of deceit. Karen stayed hunched in her chair, hands shaking, chest heaving with shallow breaths. The energy she had walked in with, the dominating, loud, chest-out attitude, was gone. Her confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell trying desperately to hold itself together. The plaintiff watched her with a stunned expression, as if finally understanding the person he had been dealing with for months. Even the audience members, who had earlier looked torn and uncertain, now had a collective expression of disbelief and disappointment. Betrayal hung in the air, not Judy's betrayal. Karen's. Judge Judy exhaled slowly. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper, the quiet ache of a woman who had been falsely accused of something that attacked her integrity, her character, her life's work. And yet, even after everything Karen did, Judy never let anger take control. That's what made her the underdog who rose, not through force, but through truth. Judy lifted her chin, her voice steady but filled with a gravity that hushed the room instantly. "Ms. Parker," she said, "you came into this courtroom prepared to weaponize a lie. Not because you were wronged, but because you believed shouting louder than everyone else would give you power." Karen didn't respond. She couldn't. Judy continued, "You insulted the clerk. You threatened the staff. You told security you would fabricate accusations if you didn't get your way. All of this, before you even walked through these doors." The plaintiff nodded subtly, no longer confused but validated. The audience leaned closer, listening not to a judge scolding a defendant, but to a woman reclaiming her voice after someone tried to take it from her. Then Judy said something softer, something so unexpected that even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. "And the saddest part, Ms. Parker, is that none of this was necessary. If you had simply told the truth, today would have been just another case. Routine. Simple. Over in minutes." Karen sniffled, wiping her nose aggressively with her sleeve. Her breathing grew louder, shakier. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice breaking. "People always think I'm the bad one, no matter what I do." Judy didn't lean away. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward just an inch, her eyes softening, not in sympathy, but in clarity. "People don't think you're the bad one because of how you look," she said gently. "They think you're the bad one because of how you act." Karen's face twisted, but the fight was gone. Completely gone. Judy continued, "And today, you acted like someone who would burn down an entire courtroom just to avoid accountability for your decisions." One of the audience members inhaled sharply. The truth landed with the precision of a needle and the weight of a hammer. Judy straightened her robe. "Now," she said, "we return to the case." The plaintiff stepped forward nervously, clutching his paperwork. He had been overshadowed by chaos, but now the courtroom centered back on the reason they were all there. Judy scanned the documents, then glanced at Karen, whose eyes were red and unfocused. "The evidence is clear," Judy said. "The timeline contradicts your statement. The security footage matches the plaintiff's testimony. And your behavior, both inside and outside this courtroom, leaves no doubt." Karen swallowed, waiting for the blow. "I rule in favor of the plaintiff." The words dropped like stones. Karen's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Her body sagged into the chair as if the ruling had knocked the air out of her lungs. The plaintiff let out a breath he'd been holding for the entire case. Relief washed over his face. Judy continued, unwavering, "You will reimburse the plaintiff for the stolen merchandise, court fees, and associated costs." Karen blinked rapidly, staring down at her shaking hands. "And Ms. Parker," Judy added, her voice now sharper, "consider this a warning. False accusations don't make you powerful. They make you irresponsible. And worse, they make it harder for real victims to be heard." The entire courtroom nodded without speaking. Because she was right. Karen didn't reply. There was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to twist. Nothing left to shout. The bailiff stepped closer, not aggressively, but respectfully. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "it's time to leave the courtroom." Karen rose slowly, wiping her face, her body trembling. The strong, loud force of chaos she had been just an hour ago was gone. She walked toward the exit with small, defeated steps, avoiding every eye in the room. The audience watched in complete silence. When the doors finally closed behind her, the quiet felt like exhaling after a long storm. Judge Judy sat back, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. The underdog had risen again, not because the world handed her power, but because the truth had held her up when lies tried to drag her down. Long after Karen had been escorted out of the courtroom, a strange stillness settled over the room. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It was something closer to relief, like a thick fog lifting after a storm. People weren't whispering anymore. They weren't glued to their phones. They weren't guessing or doubting or choosing sides. They were simply processing. Because what they had just witnessed wasn't just a case. It wasn't even just a confrontation. It was the difference between weaponized victimhood and real justice. And Judge Judy, who had started this case as the underdog, now stood as the one person who never needed the spotlight to reclaim her authority. She simply let the truth do the talking. Judge Judy took a quiet breath as she gathered her papers, each movement slow and deliberate. There was nothing self-satisfied in her posture, no triumphant smirk, no, "I told you so." If anything, she looked heavier. Not with defeat, but with the weight of what she had just endured. Being falsely accused of racism wasn't just an insult. It was an attack on her character, her decades of work, her legacy. And yet, somehow, she had carried it with a calm that only those who know themselves deeply can manage. The bailiff approached her bench, not because she asked, but because he felt she needed presence, not protection. He stood beside her quietly, waiting for her to finish writing the final notes. "Are you all right, Judge?" he asked softly, his voice respectful. Judy looked up, her eyes steady. "I'm all right," she said. "But I'm disappointed." The room fell even quieter. Not because she lied, Judy continued, folding her hands neatly atop her notes. "People lie every day in this courtroom. That's nothing new." The bailiff nodded, understanding but not interrupting. "I'm disappointed," Judy said, "because she used something sacred. Something real. Something people suffer from. Something people carry in their bones every day." The audience listened, hanging on to every word, because this wasn't a judge anymore speaking. This was a human being. "She tried to twist real pain into a shield for her choices," Judy said. "And every time someone does that, the people who actually suffer discrimination are pushed further into silence." The bailiff let out a slow breath. Those words weighed heavy because they were true. False accusations don't just target the innocent, they drown out the cries of those who genuinely need justice. Judy stood, straightening her robe. "Let's bring in the next case," she said. But she didn't walk away immediately. Instead, she turned to the audience. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't for the cameras. It was something she felt they needed to hear, something the world outside the courtroom needed to understand. "Truth doesn't shout," she said softly. "It doesn't scream. It doesn't storm into a room demanding attention. Truth waits. Patiently. Quietly. And when everything else collapses, it's still standing. Every head bowed. Not out of respect for a judge, but out of respect for the truth itself." The courtroom clerk swallowed hard. Even the plaintiff, the man who had won his case, felt a lump form in his throat. Because this wasn't about merchandise anymore. This wasn't about receipts or timelines. This was about character. And Judy had just shown them what character actually looks like. As the room began to empty, small pockets of conversation filled the air, people discussing the bailiff's courage, Judy's restraint, Karen's deception. But more than anything, they discussed the lesson they were walking out with. A woman in the audience whispered to her husband, "I'll never forget what she said, truth doesn't shout." A college student recorded a short video, saying, "This is why I love Judge Judy. She stood her ground without yelling once." An older man wiped the corner of his eye and muttered, "Now that's justice." The bailiff, walking Judy out, paused near the side door. "You handled that better than anyone else could have," he said. Judy gave a rare, faint smile. "I just did my job." But the bailiff shook his head. "No, Judge. You did more than your job today." She didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She simply nodded and walked out, her silhouette framed by the light pouring in through the hallway, small, steady, unshaken. The underdog had risen again. Not by overpowering the lie, but by outlasting it. If you reach this point, comment "Truth wins" so I know you're one of the viewers who values real justice and real honesty. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video so more people can see what true accountability looks like in a courtroom.